I always thought love was supposed to feel like this warm, fuzzy blanket, but instead it felt like a heavy, wet coat I couldn't take off. For years, I wore that coat without even realizing it. You know, the kind that just weighs you down until you can't tell the difference between comfort and obligation. When I first met Mark, it was all sparks and fireworks. We were that couple everyone thought would last forever. And in the beginning, I believed it too. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. I found myself caring for him more than being with him, if that makes any sense. It was like I was more of a nurse or a maid instead of his partner. Mark had this ability to make every little thing seem like a crisis. I'd come home from work exhausted, only to find him on the couch, surrounded by empty takeout boxes. "Babe, the Wi-Fi's not working," he'd say, like it was the end of the world. Or if he couldn't find his favorite socks, it became a national emergency. At first, I just laughed it off. But those little things started to pile up, and before I knew it, I was neck deep in his chaos. When did I become responsible for everything? I couldn't even remember the last time he did his own laundry or cooked a meal. It was as if life had become one long to-do list, all with my name at the top. I tried talking to my best friend Julia about it, but she just said, "That's just how men are. You have to train them." I didn't want a dog. I wanted a partner. Every Friday night, we'd go to the same bar with his friends. They'd sit around talking about sports or whatever, and I'd be stuck in a corner, nodding along like a bobblehead. Mark never noticed how bored I was, or how I'd sometimes just sit there zoning out, thinking about what life used to be like. Then came the night that changed everything. It started like any other Friday. I was nursing a drink, half listening to Mark brag about some new achievement in the video game he was obsessed with. Then I overheard a conversation at the next table. A woman talking about finding herself after leaving a long-term relationship. Her words pierced right through the noise, and I couldn't help but think, could that be me? I'd always imagined my future with Mark, but the idea of a future alone suddenly didn't seem so scary. It was like a door had cracked open, letting in a gust of fresh air. I started to notice the little things that made me happy. Reading a book in silence, going for a walk alone, and I realized those moments of solitude were the only times I felt truly at peace. It hit me that I was happier when I wasn't constantly managing Mark's life. As weeks went by, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I'd given up. Friends I'd stopped seeing, hobbies I'd let go of, even simple joys like watching my favorite shows without his commentary. Mark never seemed to notice or care. And maybe that was the most telling thing of all. What would you do if you were me? Stick around hoping for change? Or take that leap into the unknown? I wish somebody had told me what to do. But maybe that was the point, I had to figure it out on my own. The coat was getting heavier. I knew I had to do something before it drowned me completely. But taking that first step was like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the fog below, not knowing what would catch me. The summer of 2025 was sweltering in Ohio, and the heat seemed to amplify everything that was bubbling under the surface in my life. I had turned 35 a few months ago, and every birthday felt like a ticking clock. I was standing at a crossroads, trying to balance who I was with who everyone expected me to be. Mark and I had been married for over a decade. On the surface, our life together was stable. We had a comfortable home in a suburban neighborhood, and 2 kids who were old enough to need less supervision but more guidance. It was supposed to be the perfect life, but I couldn't shake off this gnawing sense of restlessness inside me. Mark was the kind of person who thrived on routine. He liked predictability, and to him our life was set the way it should be. But for me, something felt off. "You can't just upend everything on a whim," he'd say whenever I hinted at making changes. But it wasn't a whim. It was something deeper, something that had been building for years. A few weeks earlier, I had signed up for a local art class. It was just for me, a way to reconnect with a part of myself I'd lost somewhere between PTA meetings and grocery runs. The studio was an old, renovated barn at the edge of town, and the moment I walked in, it felt like a breath of fresh air. The smell of paint, the sound of brushes against canvas, the quiet hum of creativity, it was intoxicating. But every time I left the studio, reality hit me like a wave. The moment I got home, the demands of family life snapped me back into my other world. Mark didn't really understand the art class. "It's just a hobby, right?" he'd ask almost dismissively. He didn't mean harm, but his words stung. It felt like my pursuit of something personal was being trivialized. Then there was my mother-in-law, Joy. She wasn't meddling in the traditional sense, but she had her ways of making her opinions known. "Your family needs you more than a canvas does," she'd say with that knowing look. I understood her perspective. She came from another generation, one where family was everything and personal desires were always secondary. But I couldn't help wondering if that was really the only way to live. As the weeks passed, I found myself torn. The art classes were my sanctuary, a place where I could express myself without judgment. But the more I immersed myself in them, the more I felt the strain at home. Mark seemed distant, the kids sensed the tension, and Joy's comments became more frequent. I realized I was at a pivotal moment. I could keep living the predictable life that everyone else seemed to expect, or I could step into the unknown and explore who I really was. The thought of disrupting our family's stability terrified me, but so did the idea of stifling my own growth. One evening after the kids were asleep, Mark and I sat in the living room. The air was heavy with unsaid words, and I could feel my heart pounding as I looked at him. "Mark," I said, steadying my voice, "I need to talk about the art class, and what it really means for me." His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of apprehension. I knew then that this wasn't just a conversation about a hobby. It was the beginning of something that could change everything. I found myself back in the bedroom, the only place in the house where I felt like I could truly exhale. The walls were lined with memories, photos of family trips, the kids' drawings pinned to a corkboard, even the quilt Mark and I had picked out together on our honeymoon. And yet, surrounded by all of it, I felt like a stranger in my own life. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, not just physically but emotionally. There was a heaviness in my face that I couldn't ignore. I knew what it was even if I hadn't wanted to admit it to myself before. Guilt. Guilt for wanting something more. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the cool sheets soothe my legs, and reached for the diary on my nightstand. It had been ages since I'd written anything in it. Life with kids, endless errands, and the daily grind left little room for introspection. But now it felt like a lifeline. I needed to get the thoughts out of my head and onto the page, to see if they made sense in black and white. Flipping through the old entries, I saw pages filled with happier times. Family vacations, the kids' milestones, little notes about conversations with Mark that once made me smile. I stopped at one entry from years ago, when everything had felt certain and hopeful. Reading it was almost painful, like looking at a photograph of someone I used to be. Finally, I turned to a blank page and picked up my pen. I hesitated, wondering if writing it down would make it too real, too final. But I needed to be honest, at least with myself. I missed the freedom. I wrote slowly, feeling the weight of each word. I missed the days when my choices only affected me. The sentences spilled out like confessions I hadn't dared to say aloud. Sometimes I longed for a life I never fully lived. The guilt gnawed at me as I wrote, but there was also a strange sense of release. I had been holding these feelings in for too long, pretending everything was fine when deep down I knew it wasn't. I pushed the diary away and exhaled, as though I'd just come up for air after being underwater. Looking around the room, I saw all the evidence of the life we had built together. It wasn't that I didn't love my family. I did, fiercely. But part of me felt suffocated by the very things that were supposed to bring me joy. Was it wrong to feel this way? To want more? The diary sat open on the bed, my words staring back at me like an accusation. But instead of shame, I felt an odd peace. These feelings weren't new. They'd just been buried under layers of routine and responsibility. I closed the diary, running my fingers across the cool cover. Tomorrow I would go back to the chaos. School drop-offs, grocery runs, endless chores. But tonight, in the quiet, I allowed myself to sit with the full weight of my secret. What would you do in my place? Would you risk shaking the foundations of your life for the chance to find yourself again? As I turned off the light and lay down, I knew this was only the beginning of a journey I could no longer ignore. The next morning I stood in the kitchen, the heart of our noisy, bustling home. Breakfast was in full swing. Cereal bowls clinking, the toaster popping, the steady hum of the coffee maker filling the air. Mark was already at the table, scrolling through his phone, barely glancing up as I moved around him. "Everything okay?" he asked finally, looking up as I poured myself a cup of coffee. His brows furrowed in that familiar mix of concern and distraction. "Yeah, just the usual," I replied with a forced smile. It wasn't exactly a lie. The weight of what I'd written in my diary still lingered, but it wasn't something I was ready to share yet. Not until I figured out where all of this was leading. He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to scrolling. I busied myself with breakfast, but my mind drifted. As I reached for a cabinet, my hand brushed against something tucked away in the corner. Curious, I pulled out a dusty old photo album. Mark noticed. "What's that?" he asked, still half focused on his phone. "Just some old photos," I said, carrying it to the table. I sat down and opened it, and the musty smell of paper and ink floated up, mingling with the aroma of coffee. The first page showed snapshots from a time when life had been simpler. Nights out with friends, trips that felt spontaneous and alive. "Look at us," I said, pointing to a picture of me at a concert, carefree and grinning ear to ear. Mark leaned over, his expression softening. "We were young," he chuckled. "And reckless." I nodded, but what he saw and what I saw were completely different. For him, it was nostalgia for our foundation, proof of the life we'd built. For me, it was a glimpse of the woman I used to be, the version of myself that had gotten buried under years of obligations. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked, not sure if I wanted to hear the answer. He set his phone aside for once and looked at me. "Not really," he said calmly. "We've built something good here. I wouldn't trade it for anything." The words hung between us. I knew he meant them, but they hit me differently. Because when I looked at that younger me in the photo, I felt a sharp pang of longing. Back then I had been unencumbered, free to chase dreams without weighing every choice against the impact it might have on others. The timer beeped, snapping me back to reality. I got up to finish making breakfast, but the images in the album stayed with me, haunting me quietly. Later, as I cleared the table, Mark came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You okay?" he murmured. I leaned into him, hesitating. "Yeah, just thinking," I whispered. "We're solid, you know," he said gently. It was meant to reassure, but instead it only highlighted the gap between us. The man content with the life we had, and the woman staring at a photo album, wondering where she had gone. The home office was a small, cluttered space, but it was mine. I settled into the chair with a sigh, staring at the stack of bills and receipts demanding my attention. Managing the finances had somehow become my responsibility, even though Mark always found an excuse to avoid it. I flipped open my laptop and began scrolling through our online banking statements. The numbers felt overwhelming, each transaction another reminder of how much I was carrying. Rent, utilities, groceries, it all seemed to be coming out of my account. Mark wandered in, coffee mug in hand, leaning lazily against the doorframe. "Need a break?" he asked, as if the finances were just another chore to brush aside. "I need to finish this," I replied, eyes fixed on the screen. He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "All right, just thought I'd offer." As I scanned the statements, the truth hit me harder than I expected. I was paying for almost everything. Rent, bills, food. The weight of our household was resting squarely on my shoulders. "Mark," I called, my voice tense but calm. "We need to talk about the finances." He stepped into the room, his face unreadable. "What about them?" I turned the screen toward him. "It looks like I'm covering most of the expenses." He chuckled dismissively. "Is it really that big of a deal? We're a team, right?" "A team." The words echoed bitterly. I wanted to believe it, but the numbers in front of me told a different story. Mark glanced at the laptop, then shrugged again. "I'll chip in more next month," he said. The same empty promise I'd heard so many times before. Frustration boiled inside me. This wasn't about 1 month, it was about a pattern. A partnership that didn't feel like one anymore. Mark left the room, leaving me alone with the spreadsheets and the silence. The burden wasn't just financial. It was emotional. An invisible weight pressing down on me every day. I stared at the glowing screen, my chest tight. The truth was undeniable. I wasn't just managing money. I was carrying the entire relationship, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could do it. What would you do? Keep hoping he'd finally step up, or accept that he never would? The living room felt cavernous, as if the echoes of our past arguments still clung to the walls. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling aimlessly but not really seeing anything. My thumb hovered over an old text thread with Mark. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The messages stared back at me. His words filled with regret and desperation from the last time I had left. Please come back. We can make it work. Back then I wanted so badly to believe him. But now, rereading them, all I felt was the emptiness of promises that had never been kept. Each text was a reminder of the cycle we were stuck in. Hope, disappointment, apology, repeat. I remembered the stone-like weight of regret in my chest after I'd returned last time. I told myself it would be different, that he would change. But nothing had changed. Not really. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock, each second a reminder of time slipping away. My heart raced as I thought about leaving again. The fear of his reaction always pulled me back before, but the fear of wasting my life like this was starting to outweigh it. Tears welled in my eyes as I scrolled further, rereading the same words over and over. How many times had I fallen for the same lines? How many chances had I given before realizing that nothing would ever be different? The thought was terrifying but also liberating. Maybe, just maybe, I deserved better. Upstairs, I heard Mark moving around, his footsteps echoing across the floorboards. For a moment, panic hit me. What if he came down and saw me like this? What if he realized I was thinking of leaving again? Part of me even wished he would see, so he'd finally understand how close I was to walking away. But the footsteps faded, and the silence returned. He didn't come. He never did, not when it mattered. I set the phone down on the coffee table and let out a shaky breath. The old messages still glowed on the screen, haunting me like ghosts of a past I couldn't fully escape. But in that silence, something shifted. For the first time, the thought of leaving felt less like betrayal and more like survival. The path ahead terrified me, uncertainty, judgment, the unknown. But staying meant suffocating slowly, piece by piece. Maybe the scarier choice was the one that would finally set me free. Was I about to make it worse or finally make it right? I sat in the doctor's office, the sterile scent of antiseptic heavy in the air. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow over everything. Mark was beside me, flipping through an outdated magazine, looking as if we were here for something routine. But for me it felt like the weight of years pressing down. The doctor, a kind middle-aged man with glasses perched on his nose, looked up from the file. So what brings you both in today? His tone was calm, professional. I hesitated, glancing at Mark, hoping he'd take the lead. But he just shrugged, leaving the silence to me. I swallowed hard and said, "We've been having issues. Intimacy issues." Mark shifted in his chair, irritation flickering across his face. "It's my age," he blurted, defensive. "And my health. It's not like I can help it." The doctor nodded, jotting something down. "It's quite common," he reassured. "There are ways to address these concerns." For a moment I felt relief. But it vanished when I saw Mark leaning back, arms crossed, as if daring the doctor to argue. "What if it's just not possible?" Mark said flatly. The doctor glanced between us, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes there are compatibility gaps that go beyond physical health. It's not unusual for couples to experience differences in desire." His words sank into me like ice. Compatibility gap. Not just physical, emotional. The doctor handed us a note, outlining treatment options. Medications, therapies. "It's important that you're on the same page," he added. Mark snatched the paper, barely glancing at it. "We'll see," he muttered, already rising to leave. For him it was over. For me it had only just begun. Walking out of that office, the silence between us was thicker than ever. In the car, I replayed the doctor's words. This wasn't all in my head. The emptiness I felt wasn't just me being needy. There was a chasm between us wider than I wanted to admit. Back home, Mark shut himself in his office. I stood in the hallway, staring at the folded paper in my hand. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the confirmation I'd been afraid to face. We weren't just mismatched in the bedroom, we were mismatched in life. Was this the sign I had been waiting for? The proof that it wasn't just me. That no matter how hard I tried, some gaps couldn't be closed? I slipped the note into my bag, my heart pounding with the truth I could no longer ignore. The next day, I sat in the kids' playroom, surrounded by blocks, stuffed animals, and the remnants of last night's board game marathon. Usually this space was filled with laughter, but today it felt heavy, as if the tension between Mark and me had seeped into the walls. The kids played quietly, oblivious on the surface, but I wondered, did they sense more than I gave them credit for? As if in answer, my youngest, Emily, put down her doll and walked over to me. She tugged gently at my sleeve, her wide eyes full of innocent curiosity. "Mommy," she asked, "why don't you and Daddy hug anymore?" Her question hit me like a tidal wave, knocking the air out of my lungs. I forced a smile, kneeling to her level. "Oh, sweetheart. Mommy and Daddy are just busy sometimes." Emily tilted her head, frowning slightly. "But you used to hug all the time." The truth in her words cut deeper than anything Mark had said. She had noticed. They both had. The distance between us wasn't invisible. It was written on our lives, clear even to a child. I pulled her into my arms, hugging her tightly, trying to give her comfort I wasn't sure how to explain. Her small arms wrapped around my neck, and I felt a stab of guilt so sharp it almost made me cry. It wasn't fair. Not to them. The tension, the silences, the way I tiptoed around my own marriage, it was shaping their childhood, teaching them lessons I never wanted them to learn. As Emily went back to her dolls, I sat frozen on the floor. The playroom around me looked the same, colorful, chaotic, but I knew something had shifted. If I stayed, would I be teaching them that love meant silence, distance, and quiet resentment? Or could I show them that sometimes the bravest thing is to choose honesty, even when it's hard? The fear of the unknown gnawed at me, but the fear of letting my children grow up thinking this was normal was far greater. For the first time, I wasn't just thinking about what I wanted, I was thinking about the example I was setting. And I knew I couldn't ignore that anymore. The engine purred softly as I sat in the driver's seat, parked under the old oak tree at the edge of our driveway. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The house loomed ahead, the life I had built inside it suddenly feeling like a suit 2 sizes too small. Julia sat in the passenger seat, her quiet presence grounding me. She had been my sounding board through all of this, the one person I could confide in without fear of judgment. "Whatever you decide, we're here," she said gently. Her words were a balm and a weight at the same time. I stared out the windshield, my thoughts spinning. The kids' laughter echoed faintly in my memory. Did I really want them to grow up thinking this was what love looked like? Silent dinners, unspoken resentment, promises that never materialized? The answer was obvious, but acting on it was terrifying. Fear twisted in my stomach. What if I was wrong? What if leaving broke them more than staying ever could? My doubts circled endlessly, but Julia's voice echoed in my mind. "You can't keep pretending." I drew in a shaky breath, the air cool in my lungs. For years, I had told myself silence equaled peace. But I realized now it wasn't peace. It was slow suffocation. "I think I need to start preparing for a separation," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I can't keep living like this." Julia nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's a brave choice," she said softly. "And you're not doing it alone." Her reassurance settled over me like a lifeline. I wasn't alone. I had support. I had people who wanted to see me live authentically, not just survive. I turned the key and the car rumbled to life. As I pulled away, fear still clung to me, but alongside it was something new. Lightness. Clarity. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for me to paint it in my own colors. I glanced at Julia, and she gave me a small smile. We didn't need to speak. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was filled with possibility. Was I about to make it worse? Or was I finally about to make it right? The house felt emptier after Mark moved out, echoes of arguments and silences lingering in the corners. That first weekend, the kids were with him, adjusting to a new routine none of us had asked for. I sat in the living room alone, surrounded by the quiet, and felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. For years I had valued honesty, but living it was harder than I imagined. Mark believed I was rocking the boat unnecessarily, that I'd broken the family apart. But I knew the cracks had been there for a long time. It was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. Weeks passed, and slowly I began reclaiming myself. I set up my easel in the dining room, filling the house with the smell of paint and the hum of creativity. The kids would peek over my shoulder, laughing and adding little brushstrokes of their own. We found small joys again, moments of laughter that felt real, not forced. Mark and I learned to co-parent, awkwardly at first but eventually with respect. The conversations were short, practical, but free of the tension that had once poisoned everything. Choosing my own happiness hadn't destroyed us. It gave all of us space to grow. It's still a journey, still messy, still uncertain. But for the first time in years I feel hopeful. Hopeful that my children will see a version of love that is honest, even if imperfect. Hopeful that I can build a life where I'm not just surviving but living. Leaving wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new for me and for all of us.